Yeah, that sounds good.
Should I do it again?
Yeah, do it again. And don't interrupt, guys. We don't interrupt on this show. We're not interrupting people, okay? That's not a thing that people are making comments about. That's wonderful, sweetie. That's really good. That's really good.
That's
Now,
funnier.
now somebody wrote a YouTube comment about Daddy and said that Daddy interrupts guests and makes them feel uncomfortable. Did you feel like we interrupted you there while you were trying to play your piece?
No, not really.
Do you feel like I interrupt people generally?
Well, you're interrupting me right now.
Look, that may be true because it's in context. And I think what you bring up a really good point is that there's no context around this whole thing. I mean, did you agree that there's a lack of context generally, Claudia?
I never agreed to that.
Look, I think what I do think we're both in agreement on here is that an interruption has to require a flow being disrupted by another person. I would say what I do with guests is connect thoughts, connect people, connect ideas, and I don't see how a connection can be an interruption. Would you say that's a fair assessment, Claudia?
I wasn't really listening.
Okay, listen.
I'm doing that so we don't interrupt again.
I am not into the interrupting thing, and I'm not into this judging. I'm not into this judgment culture that's happening, you know? And I think we need to let everybody cool down a bit. I know we're only on episode 19, but Jacopo, I would appreciate it if you could change the graphics to make this the season finale, because frankly, I think we need to shut down. This kind of negative energy that's coming in at me is, I think, something that's very negative for the show. And I think it's a reason to sort of, you know, pretend that we're Jacinda Ardern and this is New Zealand and do a hard stop for a couple of weeks. A hard stop. So this is now the season finale. Claudia, don't interrupt Daddy. This is the season finale now. Episode 19, not episode 20. I need you to change all the credits on that. And that's it. Let's go.
La imagen por la cual vale la pena arriesgar la vida, sacrificarse hasta la muerte en los campos de batalla de todos los continentes del mundo.
Live from our home studios in West Berlin, it's the Committee Program, the chronicle of the world's most mysterious global political strategic communications entity. On today's show, Monday, September the 6th. Ellie, Keagan, Jean-Michel Picher, Sam Moore, Keagan Goudiss and his robot Arun, Oscar, the Puffin, and featuring committee's deputy director our own Julia Doubleday and the rest of the committee gang. And now, a perfectly reasonable show to leave your children in front of for 3 hours, if that's the kind of parent you want to be. Arun Chaudhary.
Hi, yeah, that is right. That is right. I think it's a perfectly reasonable way for your child to spend time, and then for you to spend time doing what you want, which is, I think, probably selecting different segments from this and older committee show programs and watching them, but by yourself, not with your child. Time for you. Take some you time. We are, of course, this being the final show in the season, are going to be taking some of our own time soon as we retool, regather, and retread for season 2. And the thing that I wanted to say before we left was Quade. Do you know what that is, Jacopo?
Yeah.
Do you know what Quade is?
It's Mario's name, right?
It's Mario's name said correctly, or at least more correctly than you've said it the last 2 times. And the first time our people, rolled with it, and the second time they let us know how they felt. I think that's probably where these ill feelings towards me are coming from. All of a sudden, I'm interrupting, I'm ruining the guest's experience. I think this is mostly misdirection coming at me of people's anger towards you. But that's okay. That's okay. Quade Quade, the way you're going to remember that, the mnemonic device you remember that, pretend it's a Canadian saying it, eh? Pretend it's a Canadian saying it, eh? And with that in mind, we are actually going to introduce the show and the audience to Canadian politics today. What could be a more appropriate way to spend the season finale than really digging in on Canada, right? So we will be digging in on Canada, and I think we're going to start that right now. And remember, this is for your benefit, Jacopo. So I'm really hoping you're paying attention. And let's bring in Jean-Michel. Jean-Michel Picher, hello.
Hello, hello. Pleasure to be here.
Where are you speaking with us from?
I'm in Toronto, Ontario.
I told y'all he was Canadian.
Yep.
Here's the thing. You were, despite the fact you're Canadian, in fact, I want to say some of our best staffers were from Canada. You were a crucial component of both Obama 2008, which we worked on together, and Bernie 2016 together. And that sounds like whatever, except actually that Venn diagram of people who did both is not huge. So it really is sort of special and fun to see you. And I like to keep up with you even for just this reason. Because I think to us, it's sort of very obvious that it's not even always about the mechanics of the policy in a campaign. Certain campaigns attract certain energy, and you bring out the certain people in the community. And in that way, the Bernie and Obama experiences were kind of extremely similar, which is something that's hard to explain to someone certainly under 30 years old now.
Yeah, well, like with the Obama campaign, it was so clear to me I would never have a campaign anywhere near as interesting where people came out of the woodwork, but somehow a few years later, the Bernie campaign was magic as
Bernie
well.
Happened,
it was
right?
crazy.
And it was like, oh, damn. Yeah. Yes. Okay, but what we hear and what we want you here to learn us good on is these Canadian snap elections.
Yep.
So we all know Justin Trudeau, beautiful hair, seemingly has a camera in all the right spots at all times. We know this. But what's really going on? Why did he call these snap elections? And tell us more about the talented Mr. Trudeau.
Sure. So obviously it's a little different than in the US. We have a parliamentary system here in Canada. So you either have a majority party controlling parliament, at which time they can essentially pass whatever laws they want unfettered. But sometimes you get a minority parliament where there's got to be deal making, and I'm sure that's far more common in Europe and understood there. So here, Trudeau had a majority government at first in 2015, and then in 2019 there was
with his party,
election.
The Liberal
Party, yes, indeed. And he was limited to a minority parliament, so he has had to work with primarily the New Democratic Party, which is sort of the Bernie wing of politics here in Canada. And it's sort of traditional that, or on average, these minority parliaments don't last more than a couple of years. So 2019 to now, it's sort of time in general for one of these elections. But sometimes they come about by the government losing confidence of Parliament. The other parties gang up on them and say, you guys are out, let's have an election. In this case, Trudeau called the election himself, essentially by going to our Governor General and saying, time for an election. And so here we are in a short, less than 2 month election window. And we'll see, like, he would have called the election notionally because he thought he could win it. He's had one would think generally a pretty good showing in terms of COVID and keeping us on track as a country. But what we're finding in the first few weeks of this campaign is that Trumpism has reared its head here in a really interesting way. I really don't know what the impact's going to be on Election Day, but he unprecedentedly is being dogged by angry, vicious crowds who are essentially spreading disinformation and hate at all of his events. It's really scary.
And that's not his thing. Like adoring kind of even half sycophantic fans is more like his thing.
No, he is definitely used to the selfie line. He's not used to people accusing him of human trafficking or being the son of Castro or chanting "lock him up." But that's kind of what the anti-vax, anti-lockdown, angry white male crowd is doing right now, and it's quite disturbing.
And the same
actually.
way as we're seeing in France and some other places, I don't even know. That's even too big a windup we need for this. But like with there being a rise of a more far right viewpoint and challenge, is Prime Minister Trudeau taking that as an opportunity to dive towards the center, towards some sort of Macronism, or the fact that his actual main partners are progressive now, is he having to be the progressives that I think people hoped he would be? I would just say in the U.S., I think the U.S. left viewed him as a cool sort of opportunity. He seems nice, and then kind of, especially with energy policies, some other things, kind of not following through in ways that they would have appreciated. That's
I mean, I would just say he's doubling down on everything he's stood for. You know, he's basically saying we will not be cowed by these tactics, and you know, we will. His rhetoric is we will push through on climate change. We will push through on moving the country forward, quote unquote, and not sort of be impacted by these destructive, if you ask me, voices. You know, I'm all for criticism and I'm all for debate, but when there is sort of truth-denying, anti-democratic behavior, I think the only thing you can do is stand up and say, no, not okay. And he's doing that. To what level of success, we'll see. I fear this might snowball in a way that it has in the States.
And then what would that look like electorally? What would a big lurch in the electorate to the right, more misinformation, disinformation getting into the bloodstream?
It could look like a couple things. So one of the big linchpins in Canada is Quebec. It's a very populous province, and it has a primarily separatist party that runs in it called the Bloc Québécois. And they've sort of moved from being primarily separatist to being primarily Quebec interest. So there's a chance that the Liberals
sort of SNP-ish, like maybe for our UK friends, yeah.
Okay, sure. So there's a chance that if Trudeau is perceived as weak, that Quebecers will run to the Bloc Québécois to be like, if we can't have, you know, a normal, competent government with Trudeau, let's at least have a pro-Quebec group of people in Parliament to swing votes our way. There's also, Aaron O'Toole is a seemingly moderate conservative whose job it is to sort of tiptoe between the extreme right and the sort of more moderate conservatives in Canada. A Democrat in the United States like Joe Manchin would certainly be a conservative here in Canada. Mm-hmm. And so probably what ends up happening is that the vote starts looking good for O'Toole, Aaron O'Toole, the conservative leader. And either people sort of say, no, we will double down on the Liberals and make sure that we keep Trudeau in, or there's probably an equal chance that they run for the hills and say, no, we will make sure that we support the New Democratic Party led by Jagmeet Singh, the Bloc Québécois Party, as counterweights to the Conservative Party. So it's very fluid, and campaigns in Canada are so fast. They turn on a dime. They last less than 50 days. So what looked like a cakewalk for Justin Trudeau 3 weeks ago, all of a sudden looks like a knife fight. And, there will be a debate on the 9th of September, I believe. And that's where, we'll find out how all of this plays out on a national stage.
Jagmeet Singh with the New Democrats. Tell us more about him. I think he's a character who maybe our viewers would like to know more about.
Sure. He's an interesting cat. He's the New Democratic Party obviously is as I said, the sort of Bernie wing of Canadian politics. So very pro-labor, certainly further left than the Liberal Party on most issues, environmental, social, whatever. However, with a very poor history of success, especially at the federal level in Canada. Jagmeet Singh, I believe, is the second leader since a guy named Jack Layton, who really put the New Democrats more on the map federally. He's Sikh from a community outside Toronto and Brampton, and he's one of these signs of our diversity and our acceptance of diversity in Canada, which I really feel great about. He's still young. This is, I think, his second federal election, but he is campaigning extremely well. And the challenge, as it was with Bernie, is can you get people who are left of center or center to say, you know what, I'm going to forego the certainty of the liberal brand and put my chips in with the New Democrats. It's never been done. It's never really panned out in Canada. We'll see if Singh can do it. But as Canadians, as Canada continues to be more and more diverse, in Toronto, for example, where I live, more than half of the people were not born in Canada. Pretty much wherever I go in this city, other than a few maybe historic enclaves, are majority non-white. And so I think Singh is at an inflection point in this country where people are starting to, not have a problem with a guy who wears a turban being the prime minister. We'll see.
And then where do you think, in Europe, this big swing voters who we see everywhere are precarious workers? So, think like an Uber driver in Canada. Are they deciding between the Liberals and the New Democrats, or are they actually being spoken to in a different way that takes them into more conservative circles? That's my final question.
Arun, I'd say that it's very fluid right now. If you ask your average cab driver, how are you going to vote? They'll have a reason to vote for each party and a reason to vote against. And so I think ultimately it's going to come down to a battle of personalities. It's going to come down to, I may be overplaying it, but how these debates go, whether Justin Trudeau is able to, I think the right word is shame the Conservative Party leader on not speaking out against the lies and misinformation and hatred spewing from many of his supporters. I can't express how much further off the charts this behavior has been in this campaign than anything we've seen here before. So if he's able to do the shaming thing, that's great. But if he's unable to, I think people will just go to who they see as a good leader. And both Singh and O'Toole are auditioning well.
Thank you so much, Jean-Michel. We'll catch up soon and hear more about this. And always really nice to see you. Hi, and welcome to Cross Atlantic Crosstalk. With us for our ultimate Season 1 Crosstalk session is Ellie Mayo-Hagan, Director of Class Think Tank. Ellie, hello. And of course, the Deputy Director of Committee, the show's own Julia Doubleday. Julia, hello.
It's me.
Ellie, I was hoping we could start with the UK, with one of those things where you explain to us what's going on. We see Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, kind of embattled, having a lot of trouble. Can you just explain the whole situation for people from the beginning? Because I think they just see the headlines coming in. It's obviously the foreign minister, there's been problems, but why would we use the words embattled?
Yeah, so he's the foreign secretary, and basically when the US withdrew from Afghanistan, and there were lots of sort of Afghans who'd worked with the British Army who were then in danger. When that happened, he was sort of on holiday, on a very, very expensive holiday, and the rumour is that he sort of heard about it but then just carried on hanging out at the beach and sort of didn't do anything, and so then a lot of people were in danger of losing their lives as a result of that. So now he's embattled as a result of that, basically.
We should introduce him to Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz flew to Mexico during the storm that absolutely wrecked Houston this winter. So he got it mildly embattled, and then everybody moved on.
Yeah, I kind of think that's how it's going to go this time as well.
I mean, these hypocrisy vacations, and we've seen them, whether it is, the liberal mayor of Denver, like all of these sort of people who get, I think it was even Newsom, like people get themselves in trouble when they're in government. They say to do one thing, and then they do another. I think we saw with Dominic Cummings, this was certainly sort of what finally brought him down. I mean, we're going to be in this kind of state of semi-lockdown at least for another year. Sorry to be pessimistic about this, and that's probably not even pessimistic. That's frankly probably middle of the road.
First of all, in America, we're not in lockdown.
We're not in lockdown.
Let me just tell you.
I know, but things will come. We imagine, and you're right. But I imagine restrictions will be coming. Like,
we'll be imagining that we should be in lockdown for at least another year.
I guess
that's the same with us.
You pose the same question just with a more grim setup. Is the age in which we can call people sort of out for the hypocrisy around these things a bit diminishing because we have so many crises going on in such a constant way all the time that holding people accountable in these ways? Or is this still the one thing the press can still make hay out of? Something bad is happening and you're having fun somewhere.
I think it's really difficult in this country because the press still love hypocrisy, and so they always make a big deal out of it.
It's still the bread and butter, right?
Yeah, but this government, really doesn't give a shit about anything. So, they can... Dominic Cummings is the perfect example of that. Yes, he left in the end, but when he broke lockdown, they wouldn't sack him, even though it was... The public were furious, and... his explanation was full of holes. The government just refused to sack him, and then eventually he left because of a sort of internal politics war within Downing Street, and that's why he left. But I think it's actually doing a lot of damage to the political fabric in this country, which is already really damaged. Because I think what happens is ministers do things that are hypocritical, and then there's a big fuss around it in the news about their hypocrisy, and then generally often they don't get damaged, and then except for Matt Hancock, who resigned for getting off with his affair partner during lockdown.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, it's just I'd really rather scrub my brain than think about that, but yeah, so I think it's there's a big problem in this country of people being incredibly cynical about the possibility of progressive change, and that really shaping their sort of attitudes and the way they vote, and I think it's really damaging this country, and I worry that the hypocrisy of politicians and the media interest in that then followed by nothing actually happening, I worry is really reinforcing that cynicism and doing a lot of damage.
Right, gotcha. Now what? Now what do we do with you?
Yeah,
We
exactly.
gotcha. It's different in the U.S. though, Julie, right? Like hypocrisy sort of isn't this sexy thing to talk about. People tend towards purity.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's more acceptance of hypocrisy in the sense of we really accept that our politicians are corrupt and that they are part of an elite and that they live a very different life than us. And you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, Ellie, but somebody from the UK was telling me so basically every US politician, their kids are all obviously in expensive elite private schools. And someone was telling me that in the UK, that's not the case. Is that true or no? Or am I?
I think there's some politicians that can get away with it, but yeah, generally speaking, especially for Labour politicians, that isn't okay. Diane Abbott has really been given a load of trouble for
people get mad if it's okay, so your kids are too good to go to these schools that you're in charge of making sure have funding and are
exactly.
good.
It's
and it's in the US there's in the US it's politicians and their families live this totally other lifestyle, and it's just, I mean, it is we're burnt out. It's we know it's corrupt, but it suffuses everything to such a degree that it's just okay, it is what it is. And I think that also, I think we started to really see that divide in the party sorry to bring up everyone's favorite topic, but like with the Bernie Hillary thing where it was like,
no, it's
Bernie
been huge this week, Bernie Hillary, all of a sudden. So appropriate that you bring it up, frankly. Yeah.
Yeah, so I just think like Bernie was sort of the first one that started to push back on the like, well, money in politics is just a fact of life, and he showed that you can run a national campaign without big corporate money, and he sort of opened the door to this other form of politics. So now we can see there's an alternative. We're getting madder about the corruption. I think like before, when it was like everybody does it, how can you be mad? Because like, why would you be mad at this person and not be mad at the other person? Like, both the opponents are doing the same thing. So, I think Bernie is one that basically Bernie pulled me a lot more to the left, because the whole time I was growing up, I was a big Democrat. Always, loved the Democrats, watched the West Wing. I was like 12, which is the appropriate age to like the West Wing. And I was always told the Democrats are really fighting for us, but they just can't do anything because of the mean Republicans, and that's why. And that's why, everything's bad because the Republicans, they can't do anything. And then Bernie came along, and when he was running, we got to see what happens when somebody starts talking about these things that they kept saying they couldn't do. So, like, Bernie repeatedly is just saying, like, we need Medicare for all. We need free college. We need all of these things. And the way the Democratic Party responded was to try so hard to destroy him. And like that reaction, I think, woke a lot of people up to the reality that like, oh, well, actually, no, they're not actually trying to do these things. Like, if they're willing to like destroy their own party and let Trump get elected to avoid having a socialist in office, like, they probably aren't that committed to helping us get healthcare. So I think it was just sort of this, I mean, I think people are right that Bernie did make people hate the Democrats more, but it's their fault, not that they're corrupt, not his.
And we saw a lot of fallout this week with the Supreme Court basically backing up Texas on some extremely reactionary anti-reproductive rights measures. We see these things coming down, and I sort of, rather than worrying immediately about the fact that this affects millions of people's health care, I think you have a sort of grim satisfaction on the sides of Democrats. Well, we have something finally we can run on in 2022, which is sort of how they treat abortion and reproductive rights as this thing that's occasionally useful, but generally not something tasteful to talk about. I'd love to hear your reactions on how this is going down, and then Ellie, if any of this is transmitted across the pond.
I mean, I think that's a very cynical interpretation, but I mean, obviously we're both pretty cynical, but I do think that, I think people are genuinely upset.
Oh, people.
I think that
I mean, like Pelosi's, but yeah, no, go ahead.
I think people are upset and they're scared, but I think we are also seeing this sort of like vindictive, I mean, the reason that Bernie has been in the news this week is that all of these crazy Hillary dead enders are like, oh my God, like, banning abortion is Bernie's fault because the Supreme Court never would have become conservative if Trump hadn't been elected, and Trump wouldn't have been elected if Hillary hadn't lost, and Hillary wouldn't have lost if Bernie hadn't criticized her in a primary before the election that he was not in. So, I mean, like, the mental gymnastics of trying to blame Bernie for this are pretty wild, but they're also pretty like widespread throughout the remains of
and
the
one
Hillary
doesn't
verse.
wish to speak ill of the dead, but Ruth Bader Ginsburg had plenty of opportunity to make sure that these kind of thing wouldn't happen by resigning.
Well, I mean, if you're going to do like alternate, first of all, Bernie wasn't in that election, so let's start there. So that's crazy. Yes. But secondly, like he did the thing that you're supposed to do, which is that he didn't run as a third party, which, as we all know, like Ralph Nader will never stop being the boogeyman of liberals everywhere. He was not on the ballot. He was out campaigning for Hillary, like, harder than she was campaigning for herself. Like, literally, he did more events for her in the final week of her campaign than she did. But if we're going to do this, like, alternate reality thing of, like, Bernie didn't exist, so therefore Hillary won. Although, also, according to Hillary and her supporters, the Russians stole the election for Trump, so I don't know how Bernie not existing would have stopped Putin from changing all the ballots.
It's true, would have found somebody else.
Regardless, so if we're going to say Bernie, that could have happened, like, equally in another universe, Ruth Bader Ginsburg says, I'm 85 years old. I'm riddled with cancer. Perhaps I should fucking retire while Obama's in office. Like, not everything is just about you and what you want to do. And there's this sense, like, we get it with the RBG defenders, and we get it with the Hillary Clinton defenders, and we get it with this entire elite ecosystem of people where it's like the rest of one rich person, the rest and the fulfillment and the professional advancement of one rich person is worth millions of poor people. It doesn't fucking matter what happens to them as long as, like, this rich person feels validated. So, like, when I bring up, like, you know, I kind of feel like at this point you should have noticed that after Hillary Clinton lost her election, she fucked off to her mansion and never did shit again for anybody. And people are like, but she just, like, deserves it. She just deserves to rest. And I'm like, if she wasn't in it to try to get people health care, she was just in it because she wanted to wear the shiny pin, then she shouldn't have fucking been running. That's not what it's fucking about. It's not about your fucking personal fulfillment. So if you're not in the fight, get the fuck off of the fucking stage. I don't know. That, you know, got away from me a little bit, but you get what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. Ellie, and I wish I knew more about it. Like, what is the relationship of the Labor Party with reproductive rights? When, you know, as Julie describes, there is kind of a convenience, like there is sort of a what do you believe in when you actually have power to do things about it. You know, we were all inspired when we saw folks going into Ireland, you know, a traditionally Catholic country, to support reproductive rights and having to go and all this stuff. But actually in the UK itself, and specifically with labor, like what is the relationship like between activists, providers, and the party?
So there's a sort of section of Labour called Labour Women, and like they are like kind of second wave feministy, I guess, and that's their sort of where they sit, I would say, in feminism. And so like reproductive rights is really big for them, and basically I would say that the vast majority of Labour MPs are pro-choice apart from a small handful of Catholic ones who are not. Even like Sadiq Khan, who is the mayor of London, who is a practicing Muslim, is basically has always voted in favour of abortion legislation because he sort of believes that his religious beliefs shouldn't affect other people's like reproductive rights. And generally speaking, it's just, I mean, I'm really hoping I'm not speaking too soon here, but it isn't really an election issue here. People are generally fine with abortion. Like, it isn't really, like, on the table for it to be banned. I think, like, when Jeremy Hunt was health secretary, I think he tried to reduce the time to 12 weeks, and I think he failed. So at the moment, it's 24 weeks, but that's in, like, really exceptional circumstances, like the majority of terminations happen 12 weeks or before. So yeah, it's not really an issue here in the way that it is there.
It's elevated,
Yeah, there's not really any sort of politicians where it's their thing to try and like get that banned. But what I would say is you may be aware that we have a very sort of active strand of transphobic feminism in this country. Yes.
And
Turkey it's actually
what's up with that?
Yeah, we've noticed.
It's so intense over there.
I know.
I don't know.
I know. It's like, yeah, it's embarrassing. And I mean, yeah, there's a lot of sort of speculation as to why Britain in particular has like really sort of embraced this. I think partly, a lot of people think it's like partly like colonialism, kind of we say well, like what we say things are or what they are, you know, like that kind of attitude. But also I think it's because we don't have like an evangelical Christian right or a Republican Party that's obsessed with restricting the rights of trans people. So then there's like almost like a vacant space for people to pretend that transphobia is actually a progressive thing. But the way that this links to abortion is that the evangelical Christian right in the US have been like worming their way into our politics through transphobic feminism. So they've been like funding a lot of this transphobic feminist stuff and like getting involved and like they've been like funding, like lawyers have been suing clinics that like, or taking action against clinics that treat trans people, help them transition. and like they have been sort of doing some things that like have implications for abortion as well. So I think one thing that they managed to get the courts to agree is that like a 16-year-old can't consent to their own like
the nibble at
medical.
the edges.
Yeah, exactly. So that is happening, but at the moment it is like transphobic feminism is like very, very, very overrepresented in the media because like loads of like middle class columnists are massive transphobes, and like in sort of elite circles, but most people in the country are not transphobic. So still at the moment it's like a fairly like niche issue, like the sort of niche thing, the American right getting in there, but obviously there is a risk that they will use the transphobia as a jumping off point. The problem is that they've made this like unholy alliance with like feminists who believe that like women's oppression is about the fact that they have uteruses. So I think it will be a bit of a slog for them to get these women to agree that abortion is bad. But
that seems a little like the opposite thing.
Yeah, but generally speaking, it's not that much of an issue here, and everyone was quite like most people were pretty delighted by Ireland voting in such large numbers.
Yeah,
to
it was
legalize
cool.
it.
Yeah, I mean, Julia, Nancy Pelosi has reiterated that the Democratic Party is a big tent enough party to have both people who are for the right to choose and who do not support the right to choose. I don't know. To me,
Tim
it's
Kaine,
an
right?
okay litmus test. Like sort of basic access to rights and healthcare is something. But.
Well, I mean, it sort of gets back to like the whole abuse of the concept of the big tent, where it's like you're like the big tent as a concept. It could mean like a lot of people who aren't exactly the same and have different things they're passionate about working together. But the way they use big tent is to mean two groups of people whose interests are diametrically opposed and who both cannot possibly have their interests met by at the same time because they're opposed. So like, for example, the big tent trying to include Native people at Standing Rock and also their oil and gas donors. Like those two things conflict. So they can't both be represented at the same time. And every time
Silicon
that
Valley
conflict happens,
and labor, frankly, is becoming clearer and clearer.
Every time that conflict happens, we know who wins out. Is the donor class. But I mean, we're gonna see. I think Florida has already said like they're gonna, in the midst of everybody in Florida dying of COVID, they are now going to pursue a similar thing that Texas is doing. And I don't know how much you've heard about this law, Ellie, but like not only does it ban abortion after 6 weeks, which is before a lot of people know they're pregnant, it has a creepy like snitch website where you can like snitch on people for getting abortions. And actually, we got to give our shout outs to Gen Z, my favorite generation, because they already broke the website in one day. They immediately started
using it,
spamming it with fake stuff. And then like some of them wrote code to like spam it, like massively just nonstop, and it broke. So let's just pray that our Gen Z overlords keep breaking all of these stupid oppressive tools that boomers are building. And I feel like they can win that battle every time. I think it's going to take the boomers that are running this website a lot longer to outwit Gen Z.
Yeah,
so
I kind of feel like
snitch website down for now.
I kind of feel like teaching young people to code is almost like when like people sort of like delivered mass literacy.
Yeah.
It's like they did it, and then they were like, oh shit, we've actually given people
like,
loads of power.
Yeah, put the printing press away, not a good thing. Turns out,
Oh, not that kind of coding, just for Bank of America.
Yeah.
Oh, good advice from three people who I think can't code. I can't.
Hey, I can.
Code. Julia, you're always doing that stuff. Yeah. For
excuse
committee.
me.
Yeah.
No, I know SQL, which isn't really a coding language.
Oh my God!
It's a
Don't say
database
too much.
search
When
language.
you start to say what is, that's when people just jump in.
And then I started to learn Python a little bit, but I kind of forgot it. So
I don't
whatever.
even know
I
what
used to
those
be able
things
to do HTML coding. I don't know whether that's...
Oh,
H.
yeah.
How do you say it in America? H.
H.
Yeah.
H.
Yeah.
I think we do actually say H, but I say H because I have like a Welsh tick that means I just pronounce things wrong
Look,
sometimes.
I guess we know enough to be
I love
dangerous.
H. It's so cute.
We know enough to be dangerous, but
cute.
don't hire us to be your hackers. I don't think that that's where we're at.
I definitely cannot hack anything. I can't even get into any of my own accounts. So despite the fact that I keep telling all of my devices, save the password, then the next time I log in, I don't know the password and it doesn't come up, and then I have to change it every time on every account.
Thank you so
I have
much
no
for
idea what my
watching, and
passwords
we're aware
are.
that Julia's devices are all easily accessible in a constantly changing, probably similar
No, they're not.
password.
They're not even accessible to me. I think that actually they're very secure because I
that's
have to change the passwords every week.
That's good.
So, we're going now? That was very abrupt.
Yeah, we're going because it's the end of season 1. You know, the whole thing feels abrupt. I'm not going to see you guys in this context until season 2.
All right.
When is season 2?
We got to figure it out.
only
We're
knows?
in a couple of weeks, I think. We'll have.
We're like one of those HBO prestige shows where they just leave you wanting more, and then you're like, when the fuck is the next one? And they're like, I don't know, maybe 3
We're a
years.
prestige, low budget news source. It's true. It's true.
All right. Well, good night and good luck.
Cheers and ciao,
all the
y'all.
things. Godspeed. It's been a trip.
Welcome to your global news rodeo. That is a roundup of world events as curated by the show's own Forrest, Lovette, who is not here, but we carry on. Let's go. Item 1, Occupy Kashmir. Prominent politician dies. Deutsche Welle is reporting that the Kashmiri politician Saeed Ali Shah Gilani has died at 91. Gilani, a veteran separatist, has been under house arrest for 12 years in the Indian-occupied state. The Kashmir Valley is a highly contested region between Pakistan and India in one of the most militarized areas in the world. After the news of Gilani's death, the Indian government imposed a strict lockdown, not letting people leave their homes and forcing internet shutdown. Pakistan PM Imran Khan said he was deeply saddened by the news and spoke of Gilani, saying that he had struggled all his life for his people and their right to self-determination. Item 2, apartheid abides, poor targeted in South Africa. The socialist workers reporting the South African government has enacted Operation Show Your Receipt in response to ongoing rioting and looting. However, the new policy is extremely discriminatory, targeting the poorest settlements and asking for food receipts. If families fail to provide the proper evidence, their food is confiscated. A woman was recently killed by authorities outside her home in one of the settlement raids. A representative for Shack Dwellers Movement said to the socialist worker, "This is the second time the police have come to raid the settlements in this area and take people's food." He later commented, "They always target the poorest of the poor." Nobody suffers like the poor suffer, as a wise person said. Item 3, never enough. Brazil decides on indigenous lands. Al Jazeera reports the Brazilian Supreme Court is deliberating on a landmark indigenous lands rights case. The conflict primarily is between powerful farmers and indigenous peoples in reference to the 1988 Brazilian Constitution, which guarantees the right to ancestral lands. The court has adjourned until Thursday, and their decision will set a precedent for the protection of indigenous lands moving forward. President Bolsonaro's far-right administration has already sought the backing of interests and farming interests in the Amazon and elsewhere. The government solicitor general said the time framework for the 1988 law has passed and the legal security should now rest with the farmers themselves. Item 4, emancipation demonstration, Afghan women demand rights. Channel News Asia is reporting Afghan women in Herat, Afghanistan demonstrated in the streets this past week. The women were fighting for their right to education under the new Taliban rule. Their signs said they were willing to wear burqas in exchange for their daughters to have access to the schools. The demonstrators chanted, "It is a right to have education, work, and security." Herat is on the Iranian border and is known for being more cosmopolitan than some of the more conservative areas in the country where few women wear full body coverings. The Taliban has said they will not make the burqa mandatory as they did under their last rule, and that only the hijab will be required in public. Item 5, people as pawns, Lithuania houses asylum seekers. Political Europe reports Lithuania is housing around 150 asylum seekers in abandoned schoolhouses. The makeshift camp is in the center of a small village 5 kilometers from the Belarusian border. Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko is using the would-be asylum seekers, some from Ethiopia's war-torn Tigray region, as pawns in a hybrid war against EU sanctions. Lukashenko has encouraged people to fly to Minsk and cross the borders into Lithuania, Latvia, and Poland. Lithuania is offering return tickets and 300 euros to anyone who goes back home, but hasn't had many take them up on the offer. One 16-year-old in the camp said, "Even if the offer was higher, I would not go back. This is my final decision. I saw my friends dying in front of my eyes. How can I go back to where people want to kill me?" Item 6. Please, somebody mess with Texas. Shocking abortion bill upheld. The Guardian is reporting that the United States Supreme Court voted 5-4 in favor of Texas's Senate Bill 8. The bill is the most extreme anti-abortion law ever to pass since Roe v. Wade. The Texas law, swept through the Republican-dominated state legislature and signed by Republican Governor Greg Abbott, denies abortion once embryonic activity has been detected, which is around the 6-week mark. There are no exceptions in the bill for rape or incest. Other conservative states have attempted similar heartbeat bills, but they were all shut down by the courts. Along with a near-total abortion ban, private citizens will be allowed to sue any abortion provider who violates the new law, which could lead to costly litigation and potentially cause the closure of many abortion clinics in the state. I mean, you just heard us talking about this, so I won't go too highly into it, but this is how they do it. You chip away at the thing, you ram it right through. They've been wanting this for a long time. The idea that this is good politics somehow because you can run on it from one side, or this is bad politics for Republicans somehow, it's not about politics. This is about people doing a thing, a project, an anti-human project that they have wanted to do for a very long time, and we have to do something about it. Welcome to Deep Cuts, which is when we go all the way in on a subject. And today I'm very excited because we have sort of tickled the top of the subject several times, especially when talking about youth politics, and that's the notion of eco-fascism. right? The idea there'll be some uniting of ecological principles with a far-right authoritarianism in some form, right? We've only talked about it in the abstract, but today we are not going to talk about it in the abstract. So let me read my prepared remarks. On the show, we often talk about how politicians take youth politics for granted, how we assign progressive and even sometimes liberal values on younger generations that does not hold up to historical perspective. One need only think of the Directory in France for a dressed-up example of reactionary young people, and that's what got us thinking about eco-fascism. Could the lack of energy and action from the center-left and center-right consensus fuel a rise of intolerant environmentalism? What might this movement look like? Beyond our own prostagnations, who might actually make up this movement? With us today to help define eco-fascism and placed it in our constellation of worries is Sam Moore, host of 12 Rules for What podcast and author of 2 books, the upcoming Post-Internet Far Right, which is out today, and also on Dog Section Press, and also The Rise of Eco-Fascism, which will deal with a lot of what we're talking about today from Polity Press, and that will be available early next year. Thank you so much for coming on, Sam.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here.
Eco-fascism. It's a thing everyone wants to name their band. You know, it's like it's a super sexy thing. But you've written about it in terms of, well, one thing you wrote about that really jumped out at me was how natural these two things are to fit together in terms of their embrace of apocalypse. Can you talk a little bit about this kind of shared notion they have of a coming apocalypse and how this is maybe a foundation of a shared relationship?
So if you think about when people most recently started to be worried about eco-fascism, there were some worries about it in the 70s and 80s, but the contemporary period when people are thinking about it as a term and using it quite kind of a lot really stems from the Christchurch shooting. So in New Zealand, of course, there was a man who went into a mosque and murdered 51 Muslims, or 2 different mosques in Christchurch. And he named his ideology eco-fascism. So it's really from this kind of apocalypticism, this kind of terrorist apocalypticism, we might say, that the idea of eco-fascism in its like most recent form comes. But if you look really carefully at what it was that he was writing about in that manifesto, we might think that he has fairly conventional kinds of environmental politics. But no, he doesn't really. In fact, there's a particular part where he's got this kind of Q&A section in his manifesto about climate change. And one of the questions is, why don't you talk about climate change? Why don't you discuss this? Or why haven't you written, why haven't you focused on climate change? And the reason he gives for it is because this is, he says, the same problem as the problem he's talking about. And the problem he's talking about is what he calls birth rates. So the manifesto opens, this terrorist manifesto opens, it's the birth rates, it's the birth rates, it's the birth rates. It's this invocation that kind of opens the whole idea, opens the whole manifesto. And so there's a kind of a sense in which, for those on the far right, the idea of climate change as an enormous apocalyptic kind of wave actually doesn't have any of the content that we would think it would have. It doesn't have the content of being something related to, let's say, the amount of CO2 suspended in the atmosphere. That's irrelevant. It doesn't have anything to do with ecological collapse. It doesn't have anything to do with all these kind of things that environmental politics in its more conventional mode talks about. And you can see this not just in the most extreme exemplars of these, which is, of course, this guy, and also the person who perpetrated the El Paso shooting. Not just in those ones, but also in the much more widespread, much more kind of complicated youth cultures that are developing around the far right, around the kind of the post-alt-right, maybe that's a term I'll come back to explain, around the post-alt-right, various groups who are picking up various kinds of naturalization of politics. That is, they're saying like, okay, well, the really core thing here is not climate change, it's not CO2 in the atmosphere, it's not the radiative forcing of light in the atmosphere, which causes 1 point something degrees of warming. The really important thing here is something like microplastics, right? It's that our relationship to nature is fundamentally wrong in some way that we don't quite specify. But the solution, we know what the solution is. Even though many people are not particularly clear on what the problem is, they are emphatic about the solution. It is white nationalism, or it is a world cleansed and I think that's an important word to think about here. A world cleansed of other races, people who are not white. And this is so. In these images, the structure of climate change, which is the kind of the temporality in which things get exponentially worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, and then you can't stop it, which is the kind of the basic underlying structure of how you think about climate change, probably accurately, is stripped of all its content, and instead a different kind of naturalism of politics is injected instead. And it's that naturalism, that kind of naturalization of politics, because it's so various, because nature is such an open idea that could be used for so many different things, it's that openness that allows, frankly, quite like a terrifying mishmash of people to come together around nature politics, because it's not very clearly defined.
Do you think this has been more of a relationship to sort of the way like Darwinism was embraced in sort of very strange political ways that were pseudoscientific, more than it is a kind of coming together of people who like, I mean, I guess here's what I'm actually asking. Is it since what you describe is so divorced from the actual realities of climate change and the actual climate emergency, is this essentially kind of a greenwashing in the end because it takes some of those concerns and puts them in a place where it can't do anything? And I'm thinking about this in terms of traditional definitions of fascism, which is an alliance between the state and industry in some very fundamentally important way.
Yes, I think greenwashing is a very useful way of thinking about it, not because that's the core of the politics, but because of the way you introduced the idea of ecofascism earlier, was not as one particular form of politics or not particular idea, but as a convergence, say, almost opportunistic kind of convergence between interests, let's say capitalism, right? So capital, who wants there to be certain well-defined nation states and so on, because this is productive, this is useful for them, for their business, and if these nation states have an underlying racial basis, then so what? It doesn't really make any difference to most of them. And much more kind of nebulous ideas that kind of just like are from the kind of conspiratorial hinterlands, right? And it's the convergence of these two things that I think is really key. So yes, I would say greenwashing is important, but it's not important because that's the core of the politics. It's important because that's the way these two things are going to come together. I would say that probably, very likely, that greenwashing will be much weirder than you imagine it being. Mm-hmm. So if you think about QAnon, no one thinks QAnon is an environmentalist movement, right? But I would, perhaps because I've been thinking about this for way too long, but I would say that QAnon is something like an environmentalist movement, right? It has a cosmology. It has like a whole view of the universe that is like fundamentally divided between good things and bad things. And the absurdity of that universe is that it can't see the very thing that it needs to see, right? Which is exactly the thing I was talking about before, about the concentration of certain parts per million. So although it has holism, right, it has like a total view of the whole of reality, which is very characteristic of environmental thinking, although it has that, it is unable to actually make the fine kinds of distinctions within that it needs to make. So the central fact, which is that there is more carbon in the atmosphere than there have been before, and that will lead to this kind of radiative forcing, and that will lead to temperature rises and so on, and that will lead to storms and so on. All these things are just completely obscured because they don't fit into QAnon's very, very, very simple moral landscape. So greenwashing, I would say that the hagiography of Donald Trump, this sounds like an absurd thing to say, I would say the hagiography of Donald Trump is something like a greenwashing, because it's a way of avoiding the question of climate change. It's not a way of solving the question of climate change. It's a way of completely avoiding the question of climate change by proposing a different kind of naturalism in politics that is so unbelievably vast in scope, that contains everyone, but manages either on the side of good, on the side of evil, and so on. It contains a whole cosmology, but completely fails to grasp the actual simple facts that need to be grasped. And so I would say that QAnon is in some sense an environmental movement because it's operating under the same seductive procedures as environmentalism, which is to expand your view out to the whole, to everything is in your politics, right? That's what QAnon seduction is. You can say that's something about everything, but in the most tragic way possible.
It's also somehow sort of individual heroicism versus collective action in some sense, right? I mean, is this where prepping comes in and the overlap of the cultures? Because it's sort of, you're supposed to be making a last stand defending your family, defending your food and your water. It's not supposed to be the last stand is a parliament finally that accepts a certain balance of climate versus development?
Yes, I think that maybe I'm going to say something that I'm is more speculative. Climate change will not allow people a final moment at which everything is decisively resolved one way or another. It will not allow for the end of the movie, right, to happen. Right, it's just going to go on and on and on and on and on. That's like part of it. Right, there's no sudden moment at which like all the carbon in the atmosphere disappears and everyone is fine. Like that doesn't happen. It's not going to happen. So what you will get, I think, are political cultures who are trying to force that final moment. Right, political cultures, not just right-wing political cultures, although there's the most kind of likely candidate. Cultures that are trying to get to the point of the last moment and then resolve it like that. Because it would just seem like kind of endless. Like it's going on and on and on and on and on. And things are getting worse and worse and worse. Okay, well, and it never comes to a head. And that's going to be a real opportunity, I think, for particularly people on the far right who are in the book we call these collapse cultists or climate collapse cults, who will be trying to reach that moment at which everything is decisively resolved once and for all. Because it's just not going to be there in the politics. And that's going to be a real source of frustration, I think.
You, in some articles that I've seen, sort of break out, whether it be, more former political parties or people who have, have swallowed the black pill, as we say, into sort of different categories of folks who are going to be susceptible to this message, who are going to make up this movement. Can you outline those three folks for us? And then, I could have waited and then asked you, but that's not how I operate. And then show us where you see them creeping up, especially I think around Europe continental Europe is where we see it probably the clearest.
So you're absolutely right, yeah, the continental Europe is the place for it. So there's a kind of, I guess, a mantra, right, on the left, is people should historicize things, they should think of them historically. So I'm going to try and historicize that three-part distinction that you're alluding to. The three-part distinction that I think is really important for understanding the far right now is the distinction between, on the one hand, sorry, my chair is kind of creaky, is on the one hand, thinking about the state, an authoritarian state, which is absolutely central to fascism, and always has been. There are no fascist parties, there are no fascist movements that are not in some ways oriented towards the authoritarian state. Then there's the central group of people who have been split off from the state, and these people are movements. So, you mentioned prepping, that's one kind of movement. It's not obviously it's not like a movement, not like the civil rights movement, but it's kind of a movement of itself. We might think of the alt-right, we might think of MAGA, we might think of kind of supporters of various parties in Europe and so on. Padiga, we might think of large street organisations in the UK, things like the EDL, English Defence League, or the Democratic Football Lads Alliance, who replaced the Football Lads Alliance, who apparently weren't democratic enough. So these are the large movements. And they are split off from the state, from the authoritarian state, by one of the most important, I think, to understand historical processes of the last 40 years, right? So this is what neoliberalism means. It means that there is a state, there is a liberalism that is unquestionable and cannot be questioned, and then there is civil society, and the two things are disconnected. They don't have any relationship to each other. And what we've seen in the last 10 years is a sudden resurgence after 30 years of just a barren social, wider civil society. And I'm thinking about quite basic things, like people just don't participate in the world in the same way as they did, for example, in fascism. So in the fascist period, people were, particularly in Germany and Italy and other places, Romania, were very just involved in community, church communities, choirs, walking groups, reading groups, political debate clubs, and so on. You think these are all quite trivial things, but these are the things that actually knit societies together. And this these are
the things that the modern center left lacks, and why there is no left-wing mass party anywhere.
Yes,
right?
Yeah, precisely, exactly right. So these are things that knitted society together, and that meant that fascism could simply kind of assume the power of the state when it got into it. It was just okay, well, we don't need to go through this liberal democracy procedure because we are the people. And they could make what was obviously a false claim, but was not a totally baffling claim in the same way that say QAnon is we are the people. You're like, no, you're not. You're just not the people. Whereas the Nazis and the fascists, although they were a very small group of the total German population or total Italian population and so on, and of course radically exclusive, were much more densely knit into society, and therefore they could assume the mantle of the state much more rapidly. So that's changed. in the last 40 years, there's been this separation off, and in the last 10 years, with the rise of the internet, there's a return back to this kind of things. To there being the two things being put back together: the authoritarian state and the mass movements. QAnon is a really good example of this. QAnon is a mass movement that is advocating for the power of the authoritarian state. That's its function. And it's taken all of the kind of conspiratorial milieu that you had in the 1990s and 2000 and so on, under Obama, in particular the Jade Helm conspiracy. You know, they're all coming in their UN helicopters and so on to get us. It's taken all of that and just made it into the most core, intense supporters of the authoritarian state. So these are the first two parts of the distinction. You have the authoritarian state and the mass movement. And then you have, that you also didn't have in the 1930s, a split between mass movements and deadly violence, which is that it is no longer okay for groups in society to contest politics by killing people. And it wasn't really kind of okay in any kind of like really kind of clear sense in the 1920s and 30s, but it was much more common, right? Like the fact that the SA could go around and beat people up, and the fact that the fascists could just like murder people, and the SA kill people, and the SS kill people, and so on. These were just like much more common because the state had much less power, and so like civil society was contested in much more kind of fluid ways. So we now operate inside this three-part distinction. There is the state, the movement, and the deadly violence. The threat of fascism relies on those three things coming back together. I think that's what you're alluding to when you're talking about like continental Europe. Like, that's what it means. That's why it's significant when the Christchurch shooter, who killed all these Muslims in New Zealand, why it was significant that he had gone around all these like far-right parties, or the far-right kind of movements in Europe, Generation Identity, most importantly, and given them loads of money that he'd inherited, right? Mm-hmm. Like, that's why it's important that that happened. And that's why it's important that Scott Morrison, who is now the Prime Minister of Australia, when he was the immigration minister, or the foreign minister, I think, of Australia, he had a campaign that said, "No way, you will not make Australia a home." This is a big campaign. It's like anti-migrant. We're not going to take anybody. No migration. Zero. That slogan was then used by Generation Identity in their movements in the Mediterranean to fend off migrants who are coming from North Africa to Italy and so on. And so, okay, well, we have a slogan here that is developed by a right-wing government that is then reappropriated by a far-right, borderline fascist movement, Generation Identity. And then we have like a terrorist, like a person who has like killed lots and lots of people, supporting that organization and naming his manifesto after a conspiracy theory that they propagate, right? And this is how you get these three things coming back together. So it's not just continental Europe, it's maybe there's more kind of international connection there. But yes, what's terrifying is the idea they could come back together. I know it was an incredibly long answer. I'm sorry.
No, and it's right, and you're really speaking to one of the themes of the show, which is that there is global solidarity on the right, and there are reaping real rewards from that. And it doesn't exist on the left, where people sort of fight politics only in elections and not as a constant contest in the culture, which is maybe why they wonder why the youth show up. I mean, can we zone in this three groups on the kids for a second? On the youth quake, I mean, are they the tipping point that sort of makes this eco-fascism viable when you have a certain percentage of youth all of a sudden supporting this kind of thing?
There was a thing a few years ago which got some slightly shoddy journalism done about it, which is called Pine Tree Twitter. And Pine Tree Twitter still exists. You can go and find it if you just search for like the pine tree emoji. People have lots of this in their name on Twitter. And that was a very open collection of people who had, many of whom had like come out of the alt-right, not as in they de-radicalized, but they had simply shifted their politics. So the alt-right was like, race. That's the thing. It's all about race. And then they kind of shifted their politics to be like, oh no, it's actually all about nature and about the connection of, say, white people, Aryans, whatever, like to nature, all these kind of like ideas. So they shifted their politics very slightly. And they're like, no, we've kind of drilled down through the alt-right politics. We've drilled down, we found what's at the bottom of this. And what's at the bottom of it is a relationship to nature. And so there's a shift in the politics that happens there. That culture was very open. And what I mean by that was that someone did some research into it, which was pretty good, which was that they found a whole range of political positions. So Ted Kaczynskiism, right? Like, so kind of radicalism of that sort. So not racist radicalism. Lots of these Nazis and people have been trying to write to Kaczynski while he's in jail. And he's mostly like, Can I swear on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Fuck
yeah,
off.
yeah.
You know,
As I'm sure Ted Kaczynski would.
Yeah,
when
no,
he goes
yes,
to see
sure,
an
yes.
email from a Nazi. He'd be like, what
Yeah.
the fuck?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
who gave you my number? You know? Like, yeah.
Yes, precisely. So like, there's this kind of they're trying to appropriate this a syncretism between the alt-right, this pine tree Twitter thing, Ted Kaczynski, Prepper, Back to the Wood stuff. These dynamics are not yet played out, but that is an emerging youth culture, and I think it's something we should watch. I don't know where it's going to go next, but I would be very, very surprised if the place it was going to go next was anything less radical. There is no moderation coming. There's no point at which these people will be like, oh, okay, we'll just like opt for reforms and so on.
Yeah.
There are forms of exhaustion, and this is quite important. So there's a guy called Mike Marr. I don't know if you come across him, and he wrote a collection of things. I've forgotten the name of the book, it's slipped my mind, but he wrote a book in which he's trying to live the Kaczynskian lifestyle. He's like, okay, I'm going to, I'm going to go without food for like 20, not longer than that, 72 hours. I'm going to go without food for 10 days, and then I'm going to like meet God, and then God is going to tell me, what I should do then. And the book is kind of about that, kind of about this kind of quest, and it's also just kind of about his like really nasty, just like petty, racist rambling, and it's also about his failure to actually do any of the things he says he's going to do. It's also about this kind of exhaustion. And so it's really the dynamic between like, can I revolt in a successful way, and will I be exhausted by attempting to revolt and failing? That's really what I think is the central dynamic of this youth culture. I'll give you one other example of exactly that. There was a Telegram channel called Ecofascism Central. It's gone now. Unfortunately for my research, but it's good that it's gone. The best meme that was ever posted in that was a neo-Nazi guy, kind of silhouetted, holding up an AK-47, silhouetted against the Sonnenrand, which is like this. It's 12 iterations of the Sig rune, which is it's a symbol the SS used to use. It's used a lot in countries where the swastika is banned.
Yes.
It's because it's not illegal. So the Sonnenrand, this guy silhouetted the phrase "revolt against the system." So revolt against the system is from the Turner Diaries. It's a phrase about kind of this, like a race war. It's about a race war.
Yeah.
And then the examples of ways in which you are supposed to revolt against the system are, and I shit you not, eat less junk food, recycle, take out the wash your things before you put them in the recycling bin. Like it's like the most unbelievably milquetoast, boring conventional environmentalism, because they don't have an environmental politics that goes beyond invoking nature and then just kind of like
sort of
self-help
stuff.
And this dynamic, this tension is just like all over the far right. I don't know where that goes. I don't know if they're going to develop a better politics than that, or like a clearer politics than that. In some ways, I hope not. But it's a really open question, like where they sit between this conventionalism and this unbelievable extremism.
Well, let me set up a slightly cynical scenario, and you can react to it, maybe even hopefully, as a way to take us out. Or not. We'll just go deeper in together. It's fine. But, like, I feel like in a reform way, like, I feel like there is no countervailing center of gravity to what you're talking about, because I don't see, and correct me where I'm wrong, in terms of sort of eco-terrorism in the 80s, you let some ferrets out of some thing and somebody got hurt and all of a sudden it was eco-terrorism, was so sort of happily vilified by the left as like, well, that's not right. And then you saw how the Democratic Party dealt specifically with, and maybe you didn't, and I can talk more about her if you want, but Marianne Williamson, who was a presidential candidate I actually worked with a bit, who spoke in a language of wellness, who spoke to the community you're talking about, and who was met with, instead of, this is our opportunity to bring some new people in the Democratic Party, it was much more like, she's a Looney Tune and she speaks to crystal people who are Looney Tunes. We don't want them. So if these two things, sort of in terms of more extreme and more reform-minded wellness kind of individuals, are being pushed out, does that mean that there is that the fascists don't have to have a better argument than like brush your teeth and like clean up nothing?
I go back and forth on not particularly Marianne Williamson, but on other people like her. What is the function? What is the use of woo-woo right, for left politics? I think it's a genuine open question. I don't know. I would say that when we're talking about youth cultures on the far right, like Pine Tree Twitter, like this kind of thing, we're talking about fairly small groups of people. There is also on the left, everyone who's ever heard of Greta Thunberg, right? Like, these people are also very, very young, and they're also international, and they're also like networked internationally, and they're also pretty effective. And perhaps not at changing climate policy, but then no one has been effective at changing climate policy, so it's not exactly a a stick to beat them with. Actually, really effective at inspiring like loads and loads of people. We're talking about like literally tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of people. Right? That's no small deal. So I think there is already a left wing climate-oriented environmentalist movement. I think that's already there. We don't need to be entirely kind of pessimistic about that. On the question of woo-woo, what do I think about that? I'm not sure. I'm going to articulate what I think the tension is. The tension is between, on the one hand, committing to a clear-eyed rationalism about the world, which allows you to say, the problem is not that everyone's chakras are misaligned. The problem is not that we have bad energy and we need to like love each other more. The problem is that there is too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Right, it's a biochemical fact about the atmosphere. Right, that's the problem, and that of course leads back into thinking about capitalism and industry and so on. That's okay, but we cannot let slip that clear-eyed focus on what the actual problem is, because then we will not solve it. And no amount of good faith, no amount of like kind of healing vibes will allow us to like return to a point where anything like a reasonable politics, anything like a humane politics, is even remotely possible. Right, it's just not going to happen. So. Fundamentally, I think I'm stuck on the question of whether or not we can even slightly deviate from what like is the absolute fact of the matter, which is like which requires a thoroughgoing rationality. That's not going to happen. So, strategically, I can see a clear case for a much more welcoming, much more open form of leftist environmentalism that accepts that people have very, very different ways of articulating what the fundamental problem is. And if Maureen Williamson wants to talk about healing vibes, that's good. We need that kind of person so that we can bring people into the space so the left doesn't feel punitive and aggressive and like kind of horrible to be in. Right? I think those are all good things.
Yeah. I mean, look, Sam, thank you so much for coming on. And look, young people, I think the biggest takeaway from here is if you are serious about quick action protecting the planet, the eco-fascists are not actually your friends.
They're not going to help.
They actually have no interest in fixing the planet. So this is not the way. These people are not your friends, just like Mom said.
That's a good summary.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you very much.
Comiteto, Karul, Komite, Weyantwe, Samiti, Wek.
All right, I want to apologize for my hair looking this messed up before we start the segment. Keagan, you deserve better than that.
It's true.
Wait, no. You disagree once, you disagree again, and then you say that's true. We live in a society. Hi, welcome back to the committee program. I'm your host, Arun Chaudhary, and with me is the great Keagan Goudiss, madman, technologist, and the creator of the Arun script writing chatbot. When last we left off, I had faced off against this mechanical innovation along with Nomiki, who was the judge in the contest, as it were. This was a bit indecisive. People wrote in. They're a little bit concerned about the methodology. Keagan, you've been working on an independent website where we can let the people decide. Is that right? Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. Well, what I thought, since there was a lot of back and forth, especially around how much I was helping the machine.
I mean, look, you see this in the Olympics, interest of fairness. You see a lot of people sort of taking a new sort of ethical swing at athletics. I think this is just one of those cases,
That's a fair point. So this time you're going to see the website. You can share it on the show, live, whatever you prefer. or we can go back to the tape later, just so people are assured that it truly is man versus machine. And then we're going to put the 2 scripts up on the website, let the people vote, and then the winner, let's make an ad.
All right, but we have new prompts for this afternoon. Is that correct?
We have new prompts.
New prompts.
I was hoping that maybe you had one that you'd like to... So maybe just you offer up a prompt that you'd like, and I offer up one, so it's a lot more ad-libbed than last time. Where
Yeah,
we were
okay. Okay, I mean, I would definitely say, I mean, this week we've especially are seeing footage of images from flooding in New York City and Philadelphia, 2 places close to my heart. I would like to say the prompt is, why don't I give like the slogan for the prompt so we can see who can get there fastest, you know what I mean, kind of? So the prompt is, we can't afford the cost of the climate emergency. And so then I'm going to take a minute and a half. Is that right?
Yeah, we have a minute and a half to work on this. I'm going to share my
Xhevat,
screen.
let's do the music thing again, all right? So put some music up and a timer, and we'll count it down from 90. All right, here we go. On your marks, get set, go.
All right, so with mine, it comes up with 2 options. Let's see which
I'm working. Okay.
Are we at 90 seconds?
We'll find that out in the editing, honestly. I think it was less than that. I got enough.
This one isn't that good.
I got enough. Good. Good. Okay, you go first. What do you got?
I said, no, mine isn't that good, unfortunately.
No,
So
that's
I wanna do
good.
this one again. All right. You want to win.
That means I'm gonna win. Yeah. But give me the better of the two.
We can't afford the cost of climate emergency. If the global warming debate is to be settled upon its fundamentals, then perhaps it is time for the definition of the terms to be reviewed. It should be stated that the term climate change was invented for this very purpose, to widen the general concept of climate beyond its range of natural variation into an abyss where humans could be blamed with any weather, any season, any event. So it kind of went a little bit like...
This is better for copy than for an ad, but like I could imagine this being pretty decent copy alongside a graphic or even a video of some kind.
Yeah, it's not quite. So I kind of want to go again if you give me another chance. But if you want to,
take it. I'm generous, magnanimous.
Some might even say magnanimous. All right. Well, you want to do one other prompt? See what we come up with?
I thought you were going to give it another shot on this prompt.
Oh, you want me to? Yeah, I will.
Yeah. Because I already did a thing. You know.
Before you share us.
To catch folks up, this is a chatbot that has been trained to write scripts based on my scripts. What could be a better teacher? What could be a better evolution? I don't know, for something. I'm riffing here. All right, while you do that, I will read mine, and then I'll send it to you later, Xhevat, and we can do something with it or whatever.
What's
New
yours,
climate
Ron?
denial. The new climate denial is not asking, is this man-made? It's not asking if this is real. It's asking if you plan on doing something about it. If you plan on meeting this moment, or if you plan on missing it. We can't afford... Wait a minute. We can no longer afford to think about the bottom line. We can no longer afford to think of anything other than our families, our communities, and our safety. We can no longer afford the cost of the climate emergency. It's playing around a lot with the costs and stuff. I was thinking about that thing in the UK. They did the report. They actually sort of... One of the few things you've seen move the climate change debate was this report they did in the UK where they actually put a monetary cost on everything. Maybe they should have done one of those with Brexit. Who am I to say? But they did a climate change.
I think the other side
changed.
sort of did that, didn't they?
Yeah, no, they
it
just did it in reverse. That's right. And it was. I think it really helped people see. Oh, right. This is something we actually destroying the planet is not. It cannot be profitable by any definition that profits you. It can only be profitable by definition of the very, 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 very ultra wealthy. I mean, there's just no other way to measure that kind of.
So this is one of those things where it's like it's almost there, and we need we can't probably call Nomi right now.
It needs a human. It needs a human partner. All right, give us what you got, and maybe we'll take it home together in an instant.
Yeah. So here, I mean, like, I think this is close.
It feels good. Yeah.
We can't afford the cost of the climate emergency. If it's wrong to wreck the climate, then it's wrong to profit from that wreckage. In the same way, the fossil fuel industry has been unduly rewarded for its carbon pollution, so it must be adequately penalized for its failure to transition away from fossil fuels. And then it trails off here, so it really needs an ending. Those who take climate action seriously need to realize that this is, but it stopped, right? So if you allow this
This is good. This is good, and it's like there's something. If I was playing around with this, I would say something that's interesting is the idea that we're not all in this together. The idea of polarization against fossil fuel companies, and sort of being like, some people will be hurt by this. They're the people who used to profit by this. Therefore, that pain is justified. I think that's interesting, right? It's the sort of thing people try not to do with coal miners because, it's not a coal miner's fault that they are being paid to do something that's both dangerous and bad for the environment, but it is Exxon's fault, right? Like, it actually is the corporation's fault. So actually honing in on that is, I think, interesting. So I think what it needs is just a concluding couplet that's sort of like, it's okay and appropriate to assign blame.
Let's try. We'll take this last sentence out and we'll try generating one more time and see what we got. Oh, this is pretty good. That's not bad.
It's small in my.
There must be a just transition in order to create a sustainable and just future for all life on Earth. That's not bad.
That's not bad.
It's not quite what I think you're going with, and what I would go with. But look, I think you're being nice, Arun. I'm going to be honest here.
No, I know. I won again. And I feel like everyone sees that, and so I didn't want to actually put too fine a point on it.
I kind of feel like I failed.
No. You succeeded in proving the limitations of this particular chatbot. That's how science works. I don't mean to science explain you because you're wearing the lab coat, and I do think
Arun,
the costumes
you're
matter.
a very humble winner.
I do believe the costumes matter, but I think that in this case, the human beings have prevailed.
For now. Well, actually, I think I should be rooting for the humans, not the machines. But
look, you've got some time, though. You've got some time to work on this. Maybe we can even send people to the site when we put this up as a separate clip. But season 2 is just around the corner. We're going to be retooling things, rejiggering things. Should be interesting. Maybe we'll even have a better arena to kind of take this on. I'm hoping we get a lot more campaign makeover people, folks, and maybe we could actually do a crossover episode with robot campaign makeovers.
Yeah. And well, one of the uses that maybe we could explore with this is let's take like to your point with the makeover. Let's take your existing script and see what the machine churns out as the run bot churns out as an alternative. But I still think if you're okay with it, let's put these two scripts on the website. Let's encourage viewers to go to arun.com, vote on it. I'd still like to
runversusrun.com, y'all. Please go visit.
Yep. I still want to make that ad. I still want to show people the winner if you're open to that.
Totally. Yeah. Absolutely. We will get to it. We say that a lot around here, and I would say 75% of the time, it's true.
La imagen por la cual vale la pena arriesgar la vida, sacrificarse hasta la muerte en los campos de batalla de todos los continentes del mundo.
Hi, welcome back to the committee program. I am your host, Arun Chaudhary. Earlier, we were speaking with Jean-Michel Picher about Canada, etc., the Trudeaus, the talented Trudeaus, and he pointed out a CBC documentary on Pierre Trudeau, who has come up on the show and at any lecture I ever do before as a leader who is sort of very image conscious. Like we talked about Marshall McLuhan, the Canadian information theorist. He was the one who told Pierre Trudeau to shave his beard and then run, and he did it and he won. Anyway, there's a very interesting and I think documentary, and we're going to watch it now. And I think it also shows you how, when you know how to spin these things right, you can have trusted news sources just really give a hagiography about how awesome you are. It's just impressive stuff to get in under the model of news. So, in the interest of understanding agitprop better, on this, the season finale, let us watch an outstanding piece of unintentional agitprop, probably the most effective kind that there is.
Good evening, I'm Norman DePoe. The program is News Magazine, and the scene, of course, is Parliament Hill. With me, the recently appointed Minister of Justice, Pierre Elliott Trudeau. At the age of 44, he's one of the younger cabinet ministers in our history. In a sense, he has inherited the post of the first Prime Minister of Canada, Sir John A. Macdonald. You may recall that Sir John was Attorney General of the United Canadas way back when. The modern office of Minister of Justice is the administrative successor of Sir John's position. And Mr. Trudeau has inherited Sir John A.'s office. In the West Block, the first part of the Parliament buildings to be completed in the 19th century. We've been following Mr. Trudeau fairly closely for a few days. To find out what kind of a Minister of Justice we have, we began our investigation in Sir John A.'s former office. Mr. Trudeau, Sir John A. once remarked that it took a new member of Parliament a whole year just to find out the location of the gentleman's room and where to hang up his coat. Just 17 months after your election, you've stepped into a pretty important ministry. Do you feel that your relative lack of parliamentary experience hampers you in any way, or are you worried about it?
Oh, I'm not worried about it. I'm sure it does hamper me. I haven't learned 1/5 of what there is to learn about Parliament and its rules. Haven't even learned where to hang up my coat yet, as a matter of fact. I'm not too worried about that. I don't wear one, but the rules themselves are a long process of learning, and it doesn't worry me because I'm in the same position as any other new member.
You have a special responsibility, though, especially at question time. Do you feel confident you can handle yourself in the House when the opposition really starts after you?
I don't know. When I don't know the answers, I suppose I will tell them that I don't know the answers. If I know them, I'll give them. I don't see why I should worry about that either.
It's been suggested recently by some of your critics in French Canada that your views on federalism are not in line with the mainstream opinion of the province of Quebec. How do you feel about that?
Well, the mainstream of, I would say, opinion formers in Quebec, I would agree with. But that doesn't worry me either. I've never tended to agree with the mainstream of people. I just think they're wrong. That's all. I saw recently, too, that I don't agree with perhaps an important stream of opinion in the rest of Canada. So what? You know, the trouble is that the people you're referring to in Quebec want one type of solution to the constitutional issue, and the people to which I'm referring in other provinces want a completely different set of solutions, and the two just won't go together. So I'm trying, with many others, to find a bridge between these very different and opposing tendencies.
How about your own department? What do you think the biggest problem is facing the Department of Justice?
I suppose the biggest problem is partly within the department, but partly within the mentality of the Canadian people. I think that people must be made to realize more that the Department of Justice is one of the main planning departments of government. It's really planning the society in which we will be living tomorrow. It's planning the framework, the legal framework within which every one of our actions must be inscribed. I think the people I've met over there are, on the average, a fairly young group with progressive ideas, and I have no doubt that we will manage to project a little more of this image into the country of a department which is really planning for tomorrow and not just being the government's lawyer, you know, pleading cases and defending the government or prosecuting the citizen.
Well, I was talking last week to two senior police officials in the province of Quebec, one the director of the provincial police, the other the director of the Montreal City Police. They both said that your progressive ideas in penal institutions especially are soft ideas.
Well, I think policemen are playing a difficult role in any society, and I respect part of the job they're doing as fact finders, as devoted people to the problems of order. I think that I respect policemen, but I don't think that any democratic society should be guided by the ideas of its police chiefs in the area of social or penal reform, no more than the army should run a democratic country. I don't think the police should decide in what way the penal and criminal reforms should go. The policeman's point of view is just a very narrow, single one, which has its weight, but which is not certainly the compelling one.
Well, what about the charge I've sometimes heard made about you that you're a vendu, a sellout to English Canada?
Well, I suppose like most emotional charges, first of all, I disregard them, then I should try and see what they really mean. What it really means, I suppose, is that some people disagree with my view of Canada as a government which brings together various people of various origins. And I don't agree with the charge. I'm a little distressed when I think that people who don't agree with your ideas can't attack the ideas and can't show that they are wrong, but are mainly concerned with destroying the reputation or the intentions of the one that has them. So I think that people who have told you this are probably totalitarian in mind, and they don't accept the free discussion of ideas. But that people should disagree with me in Quebec, I know, and that people should disagree with me in other parts of the countries, I also know. But, you know, the main thing is to try and find the consensus which will be the formation of a society which is the best possible for everyone.
It was widely said when you and Jean Marchand and Gérard Pelletier finally decided to become actively engaged in politics that your main objective was to turn the Liberal Party into more of a reform party. Now two of you are in the cabinet, one as a parliamentary secretary. Do you feel you're making headway in your original goals?
Well, I think we are, but I must correct you slightly, Mr. Depot. Our main objective was not to turn the Liberal Party into a reform party. Our main objective was to join what we thought to be the only party which could find now a solution to the problems of Canada breaking up or not breaking up. We felt that this was the main reason we entered the Liberal Party. Of course, we wouldn't have done it if we thought that that party would at the same time have precluded any approach to reform, but this was, in a sense, second, a very close second, but it was second. Now, whether we find we're making progress or not, I think we are making progress. I think politics are fun. I think that a few of my friends and I who are in it are going to try and do a job, and I don't think that we would be, broken if we didn't succeed. We'd do something else, but we're very optimistic about it. We think that things are going well. We think that the trend towards separation in Quebec has been reversed. We feel that now the people in Quebec are getting more and more interested in federal politics, and we think the show is on the road.
And on the road he is, literally and personally, mostly in constant commuting between Ottawa and his Montreal constituency.
Back in Ottawa, we were talking about Pierre Trudeau, the politician, the political philosopher, but there's also Pierre Trudeau, the traveler. At the moment, you're somewhat restricted in your travels, but you have done a lot around the world. What stands out most in your mind about that part of your life?
Well, it's a period that was mainly came after my studies, and it was before I got down to work, so it's a transitional period which I remember very fondly, and I try to recreate whenever I can get a vacation. There's a long bit of traveling through Europe and Asia and Africa. And
where did you go in Asia?
Just about every country, I think. Korea is the only one I didn't go to. India, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Middle East.
I've been told you were in China just about the time the communists took over.
Yes, I was in China in 48, 49, the end of 48, beginning of 49, when the communists were on the other side of the Yangtze, and I was traveling around the southeastern China, yes.
And then you were in Palestine during the Palestine War, weren't you?
Yes, I was in Palestine just shortly after the Bernadotte assassination. I was in Jerusalem and on the Arab side of Palestine. I only went to the Israeli side in a later trip by another way around.
I'm told you got in some trouble with the Arabs. Is this true?
Yes, I got in some trouble with the citizens of various countries. The way I was traveling, with a beard and a pack sack and all that, I guess various people thought I was spying on somebody or other. But in the case of the Arabs, it was quite an adventure, because I was in Amman, actually, in the capital of Jordan, and there was a lot of fighting going on around Jerusalem, and I wanted to get there. And everyone said you couldn't get there, and actually I went by joining up with a group of Arab irregulars. I mean, I just loaded into a truck with them, and we crossed the checkpoints, and they just dumped us into the city of Jerusalem. And that's a few adventures there, and then I was picked up, and they thought I was a Haganah spy, and they kept me in the tower for a couple of days, and then they shipped me back to Amman to go to jail there. It was quite a long and involved process.
Tell me, how did you find the Arab jails?
The one in Jerusalem, it was really a guardhouse rather than a jail. It was, actually it was rather nice. They tell me it was the part in which historians say is where they locked up Christ a couple of thousand years ago. And it was a guardhouse now, and there were people came to visit me from various nations. There were lots of people then who joined the Arab irregulars, and I didn't eat much, but I drank a lot of coffee, I think it was.
Well, sometime later on you went to Moscow to attend an international conference, and...
That was 52. Yes, there was an international economic conference there. And that was in the days when Stalin was at his height, and it was quite an event in those days to go to Moscow. It was spent about a month in all in the Soviet Union, a couple of weeks in Moscow, and a couple of weeks traveling down towards the south, towards Georgia, and along the Caspian, along the Black Sea.
I've been looking up some old files of the magazine that you and Gerard Beltier founded, and after you came back from Moscow, you seemed to find yourself in some trouble with the more conservative wing of the Roman Catholic Church.
Well, 15 years ago, if you went to Moscow, people asked questions about you, not only in Quebec, but in other parts of Canada, and certainly in the United States. I was blacklisted from the United States for a few years, and, I felt it a perfectly justifiable trip. I'd been to most of the countries of the world, and I didn't see why I wouldn't be able to go to the Soviet Union, which is one of the great countries, and I did. I had a very interesting time there.
Well, you mentioned China. What about Vietnam? Were you there, too?
Yes, I went to Vietnam just before going to China, actually. I came in from Siam and into Cambodia. Spent a bit of time there up in the ruins of those fantastic ruins of Angkor. Yes. And they were still in trouble then, There was the Izaraks were still, the country was in a state of civil war then, and part of the traveling I'd had to do with French convoys, and I took a convoy from Phnom Penh to Saigon, actually. Very long journey, a lot of military truck and a few buses. We were ambushed, actually, crossing La Plaine des Gens, and some people were done in, and finally got to Saigon. It was quite an adventure.
All of this travel, and you've done a great deal more of it than most people, must have had some effect on you. What has it done to your views of the world, your political philosophy, your attitude generally? What kind of a stamp has it put on you?
Well, I think the main stamp it's put on is that I have a liking for people, and I try to understand them. As I was saying earlier, I feel that governments in most lands, even those we don't agree with, are generally trying to govern, no matter how misguidedly they may seem, for the good of the people.
Does that mean you believe in the social contract?
I believe in the social contract. It isn't applicable, of course, in many of these quasi-totalitarian countries, but still, by going to these lands, you see such different social and economic situations that you realize that your political standards are not necessarily applicable there, and you see especially how dependent you are. When you're bumming through China with just a little pack sack and you can't speak the language, you feel how much you need the friendship and the cooperation of the people. Otherwise you just starve to death out in the rain. But people like you if you come there rather humbly, and if you sort of make them feel that you're not trying to run anything, but you're sort of asking them for the friendship. And I suppose, in a sense, this can be applied to international relations. It can be applied within Canada. If you don't try to push people around, but make them feel that you are their guest in their country, they're not harmful to you.
Would you like to name a country that Canada could push around?
Well, there are a few that we could bear upon in the United Nations if we tried, but I don't think it's in our mentality. When I was talking about Canada, I was thinking perhaps of the internal situation. Any hardships or injustices that may have happened in Canada are really, I suppose, the result of distraction or of absent-mindedness rather than ill will and hate. And I feel that by traveling, I've come to the conclusion that the world is such a diversified place that we need institutions that are democratic and forms of government which permit the coexistence of various ethnic groups, various linguistic communities, and so on. I suppose I've learned something from these traveling, but I like to believe so because it was a great period of my life.
Despite his travels, his Montreal roots sink deep. He does much of his thinking in French, and that's the language he used when we found him after a Montreal dinner with a group of his political and intellectual friends. They were talking, among other things, about the problem of a French-Canadian finding his way to the top in a general Canadian business without risking the loss of his French-Canadian culture and identity. From the intellectual ferment, of which Pierre Trudeau has been a leader since his student days, to the feverish general ferment of the swinging Montreal he helped to create. Now perhaps is the time to answer one question. Why a program about Trudeau rather than some other equally new and equally promising cabinet minister? Here's what Professor Kenneth McNaught of Toronto University had to say recently. Trudeau's political fate will likely be the political fate of Canada. What he may have meant was that Trudeau, along with some others, is the first real chance for the turned-on generation to have a real voice in national affairs. He comes equipped with formidable qualifications. Fully bilingual, a law degree from Montreal, higher degrees from Harvard, the Sorbonne, the London School of Economics. We've heard about his travels. He's never stopped being a rebel and a swinger. He was deeply involved in the asbestos strike of 1949, when the old Quebec paternalism clashed head-on with the inescapable facts of modern life. Despite a well-to-do background, he acted as lawyer for many embattled unions. With Gérard Pelletier as co-editor of the magazine Cité Libre, he was a mover and shaker in the quiet revolution. He's thrown snowballs at the statue of Stalin in Moscow and the one of Sir Wilfrid Laurier in Ottawa. He's an unostentatiously dutiful Roman Catholic who fights fiercely against any claim that the hierarchy has a divine right over all ideas, especially new ideas. As a teacher, he frankly pitched his courses to the best minds in his classes, leaving the others, with some help, to sink or swim. He's personally austere. His apartment sparsely but tastefully furnished. He keeps it as private as he can. Most of all, though, he cares.
Well, here we are, Pierre, in the crossroads of the second largest French-speaking city in the world, as they say. And perhaps it's time to talk about that aspect of it. This is one of the places where the two Canadian cultures are supposed to meet and mingle. Do they really?
They meet, they mingle, but they also clash a little bit. This is a good corner, eh? You don't only meet French and English, but you meet Canadians of many origins which are here in Montreal, and I think this is a good thing. It doesn't permit the problem to look as so clear-cut. You know, it's not French and English, but it's French and English and many other ethnic groups, and this probably softens some of the harshness of what could otherwise be a clash.
Well, there have always been other ethnic groups in Montreal, but I suppose it's built up a great deal since World War II.
I think the presence of third and fourth and fifth groups obliges the people who were there in the first place to broaden their horizons and to realize that the world is really open to everyone, and that we can't seek simple solutions in terms of what might have been a stable reality, 100 years ago. But now there will be new people coming in all the time. There will be new situations, and it forces people who are thinking about the future of Canada and of Quebec, forces them to think in more complex and more realistic terms.
Well, when you look right down the street, you see the signs. There's an awful amount of American culture here. Lowe's isn't a Canadian institution. Neither really are barbecue, Colonel Saunders' Kentucky Fried Chicken. Does a city like Montreal contribute to the increasing Americanization of Canada?
I think it doesn't contribute by itself. The Americanization comes in. I think it's one of the realities. It makes one realize that no province and the country itself can be a world unto itself, and that we are, after all, situated between the great giant of modern times, and it would be absurd to try to think of political solutions which would cut oneself off from these realities. I think it forces upon people who live in Montreal to take cognizance of the complexity of the situation.
Well, the French Canadian seems to have a sort of schizophrenic view of life at the moment. He's fiercely determined to preserve his own identity. At the same time, he grabs at these American innovations just as fast as those of us who speak English do. How can he preserve his French-Canadian identity if he insists on becoming more and more American?
Well, you're perhaps talking at different levels of people. If you look at the infrastructure, the people themselves, they're not worried with what they will be the day after tomorrow. They're worried with what they will be today and whether they can enjoy life and make ends meet and so on. It's the intellectuals or the quasi-intellectuals who are asking the kind of questions you ask, Norm, about how can we preserve this identity, and who are worrying about it. I don't think that the society works that way. I think that changes are taking place, and it's up to people who are trying to describe the changes and control them to take as granted. The first law of politics is to start from the fact. Well, the fact is that we are neighbors of the greatest industrial giant that ever existed, and we shouldn't worry about the Americanization of it. We should ask how can we preserve certain fundamental and essential values? Not try and preserve the whole thing. We should accept change, but we should concentrate what few energies we have to preserve one or two or three essentials, and not try and preserve the whole society the way it was, but to preserve certain fundamental values. That makes sense?
Trudeau doesn't look middle-aged. The 158 pounds he carries are all muscle. He practices yoga, canoes, is a skier of competitive caliber, uses scuba gear expertly. In Ottawa, fitness means the Chateau Laurier swimming pool.
Pierre, it's no compliment to you to say that you're in far better physical condition than I am. You're in very good physical condition indeed. How do you find time to stay this way in addition to everything else?
Oh, I guess sport is more important than most everything in life. And, when you get out of the house of comics, you feel that you want to get a little bit of exercise in.
Well, what sports do you actually take part in?
Skiing in winter, I suppose, and snowshoeing, and summer swimming, and between season, a bit of judo and such things as that.
Take judo. Do you have a grade in judo?
I once reached the grade of brown belt, but I'd hate to wear it around now on a judo carpet, judo mat.
You also, I'm told, do this weird sport where you race down a dock with a parachute strapped on your back, and then a motorboat pulls you away, and you go up on the parachute, cut loose, and drop down into the water.
Well, that's one of the ways of proving to yourself that you're alive, and in the process of doing it, sometimes you find that you're half dead, but it's fun.
How about road racing?
Automobile road racing?
Yes.
I like to drive fairly fast, but I'm not a racer. I'm a law-abiding citizen.
You own a fairly fast car. How fast do you drive on the highway?
How fast have I driven?
Yes.
140 or something like that. Not often.
Have you ever had a ticket for speeding?
Not driving a fast car, no.
A little exercise, but always nowadays it's back to the hill and a piled-up desk. Trudeau, the bachelor sports car driver, frequently escorts some of the most ornamental and intelligent women around. For him, they must be intelligent. And that led to my last question.
After all these days together, there's one question that's still puzzling me. How is it that a man, somebody put it to, has only intelligence, charm, money, and a prominent position and is still a bachelor at the age of 44?
Norman, I don't remember why I became a bachelor. It happened so long ago that I don't think I could tell you.
One more question. We've seen quite a lot of your activity, and we've heard some of your thoughts. What's your ultimate goal in life? Do you want to be Prime Minister someday?
Hell no. I won't even be Minister of Justice if you don't let me go back to work. I don't want to be anything but administer this department well.
Well, thanks very much for your time, and I guess you do have to get back to work.
Do. Thanks very much, John. Bye.
Pierre Elliott Trudeau, an athlete, a political philosopher, a lawyer, a teacher, a bon vivant, and a man with a wide sense of humor. Now, our Minister of Justice. Good night.
Interesting stuff, right? Really interesting stuff. And when you actually really appreciate it, it's when you realize that Justin Trudeau, despite the fact that he's got the hair and he's super handsome, is actually a pale shadow of the political sort of mastermind that his father was. This is the season finale, as I've said many times, and so I do want to announce that we will be taking a couple weeks off from the show. You will not be hearing from us for the next 2 weeks, and then we will be back with a retooled, rejiggered, reconceived show in all the different ways, and it should be really interesting. If you do have ideas about how that should go, get in touch with us. Get in touch with us on Instagram, on Twitter, at patreon.com/committee program, at fans.fm/committee pro. There are many ways you can get in touch with us. I think committeeprogram@gmail.com. We've got a lot of ways to do it. So just let us know what you think. Let us know how you do it. And if you'd like to be part of the team, we have definitely a lot of room for producer types and for booker types. Please just let us know. And we'll see you soon, okay? Thanks for sticking with us all this season. Thanks for sticking with us today. We value you. Good night.